I find that we're actually living the same story over again. And I'm talking about anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, swastikas, and so on. We need to remember, and we need to learn from the past. It started with words, and it ended in horrible places. Nazi Germany, you all know, Hitler came to power. 2 years later, they had a document ready, racial laws against the Jews. Germany was a country of 64 million people, and amongst them lived 500,000 Jews, a shade over a half of 1%. Now, these racial laws were terrible. It made Jews Luftmenschen, you know, like people who lived in the air. It took away their properties. It made them second, third, fourth, fifth class citizens. And many German Jews left in good time before things were bad. I lived in Czechoslovakia at that time. I was born in Czechoslovakia. In Slovakia, near the Hungarian border, in a town of about 5,000 people. And in this town, there were about 90 Jewish families. They were traditional Orthodox Jews. There were a couple of Jews who had their store open on Shabbat. Jews practically made the town work. You know, Jews have lived in that part of the world for 1,800 years. They lived there when that part of the world was the eastern province of the Roman Empire. It was called Pannonia. So we've been living there for a long time. The Magyars came from Mongolia in the 9th century. We had 20 golden years in Czechoslovakia. So in my town, there was a beautiful synagogue. We had a rabbi. We had a cantor who was also the ritual slaughter. We had a 2-room Talmud Torah. We had a teacher, a Malamed. At a mikvah, you know. Can you imagine a town with 90 families and had all these accoutrements, you know, rabbi, cantor, yoga. My family, my paternal side of the family, we lived in that part of Slovakia, Kasha, Košice. We were about 50 kilometers from Košice. And we lived in a large house, 3 families, my paternal grandparents. And they had a daughter, Bella, who was an invalid. She must have had polio. And my uncle and aunt and my parents. I had 2 younger brothers and eventually a baby sister. It was a large property with a huge yard. My grandfather had a lumber yard there, a big stable, a big vegetable garden, and an orchard with fruit trees, mostly plum trees. And this is where I grew up, in this type of an environment. 3 kitchens, my grandmother's kitchen, my aunt's kitchen, and my mother's kitchen. It was a beautiful home. And I think back of my mother, how she managed to run her family. You know, we just couldn't open the tap and water came out. We had a well in the yard. She had a beautiful stove in the kitchen. And we had fireplaces. They're called kachel ovens in every bedroom. It was a lot of work. She had a helper. A girl came to live with us when I was born in 1929. Her name was Anna. So my father had a distillery and a drinking place called the Cellar, where people used to come and have a drink and socialize. We were well-off people. And most of the Jews in my town, the storekeepers. I know there was a Jewish shoemaker, Mr. Gutman, who made all our shoes and boots for the winter. A Jewish tailor. There were 2 Jewish doctors in this town, a Dr. Fried and a Dr. Laszlo. A dentist, Gartner. My grandfather and his buddies, they're all grandfathers, they all fought in the First World War in the Austro-Hungarian cavalry on the Russian front. And these grandfathers, they all had beards like Emperor Franz Joseph. This is how they revered the emperor. Well, this was no big deal when we were Czechs, you know, nobody knew about that. So and my maternal family lived about 300 kilometers from us in Slovakia proper, where Slovak was spoken. Where I lived, we were speaking Hungarian. Hungarian is my mother tongue. I learned Slovak when I started school. And I learned some Yiddish when I started Talmud Torah. But, you know, we were bilingual, trilingual. We spoke eventually Hungarian, Slovak, Hungarian, and German. In 1938, Czechoslovakia was partitioned by Nazi Germany. Hungarian troops marched in, and our lives changed drastically overnight, instantly. So let me talk to you about the racial laws that Hungarian brought with them. Nazi Germany had a ministry of propaganda. Imagine a country that was called the most cultured country in Europe, Germany. A ministry of propaganda. Dr. Goebbels was the head of the minister of the propaganda machinery. A massive apparatus of deception. And anyone with racial features, physical features, or religious beliefs who did not fit in the mold of the master race was supposed to be simply eradicated from the face of the world. I remember in 1938, during the Munich conference, when the fate of Czechoslovakia was being decided, my father had a crystal radio, and all his buddies came to our home to listen to the speech. I don't know how my father found out about it, about this major speech, but he did. And all his buddies, there were men about 30 in their late 30s with families. They came to listen to the speech, and I was 9 years old. I understood a few words. I remember listening to this poison coming out of the radio. I remember this one-liner. Wir werden die Juden ausradieren. We're going to eradicate the Jews from the face of the world. I knew that sort of something bad was coming. I didn't know what, but I saw the faces of my father and his buddies. I mean, these were young people. But you know, when you are 8 years old, 9 years old, you think your father is an old man. They were sort of green in the face. And we Czechoslovakian Jews, we knew that something terrible is coming down the road. So just to remind you, a few of these racial laws, there were thousands of racial laws against Jews. Boycotting Jewish stores. I'm sure you have seen pictures, the SS standing in front of Jewish stores, painting on the plate glass windows, Kauf nicht von Juden, do not buy from Jews. And this was a far-reaching boycott, not only stores. Jews were fired from every job that they had. They couldn't teach in a public school or university. Jewish kids could not attend those schools. They couldn't sit in a park unless a bench was marked for Jews. They couldn't go to a restaurant, to a movie. They couldn't have a pet. So this was a boycott. And the next was divestment. They went into Jewish homes, carried away all the artwork the Jews had. The very precious artwork it was. They took away their businesses without any compensation. And on and on. And then sanctions. Jews were put on trains, this is pre-World War II, sent to camps in Buchenwald and Dachau, Sachsenhausen. Jews were depicted as money grabbers, posters, documentaries about Jews. They are like a horde of rats coming by the millions from the East. They need to be squashed. So I said about that they have a massive apparatus of deception. You see, boycott, divestment, sanctions today in Canada is being voted on by student unions against Israel. Is that possible? Something out of a Nazi handbook? So the deception of it is, boycott means excommunication, expulsion, and extermination. Everything was censored in the papers. The propaganda machinery was drumming 24/7. Dr. Goebbels said, I have this amazing machinery, a speaker, and microphone. Can you imagine with cell phones today, how this poison travels around the world? So what they meant, expulsion meant extermination. So here it is. We are Hungarian. The Hungarian troops marched into my part of the world March the 15th, 1939. My father's business was confiscated. These racial laws were posted in different places in my town. A Jewish community had to go and read it. Jews cannot sell alcohol and tobacco. My father's business was confiscated. Numerous laws were posted. Jewish men from 18 to 45 have to report to labor battalions. And that was really a bad one. I would say out of the 90 Jewish families, perhaps 3 or 4 that didn't go. They were either invalids or something. My father and my uncle were gone for 3 years. They were taken south where Yugoslavia was, and worked in mines. A law came out that Jews cannot employ non-Jewish people, and I had to leave. She didn't want to go. She's been living with us now for about 12 or 13 years. She was part of the family. The gendarmes arrived in our home and they forcibly removed her. And my mother's load truly became much heavier. What happened to the Jewish kids in school? Hungarian teachers who hated us with a vengeance. We arrived in school where we lived there in peace under the Czechs. And when the Hungarians marched in, this poison, it's like poison mushrooms, the whole entire community changed. Jewish kids, we had a fight every morning. There was blood flowing. Nobody stopped it. We were segregated in the classroom in the back row. I was 12 and a half and I was thrown out of school. My mother took me away to the capital city of our province, Kasha, the large city. There were about 16,000 Jews living there. And I became an apprentice working in a shop. So I just want to talk about my grandfather, who was a man of the land, running a lumber yard. He was a big, strong man. He knew animals. And my grandfather taught me work skills and life skills. I was not a student. I was not a thinker. I was not couldn't sit in a school environment. I was a doer, and my grandfather gave me all these tools as if he prepared for me a map to travel by later on. My mother was my guardian angel. My father was a businessman. My maternal family had a huge farm in the center of Slovakia. My mother took me away there when I was, I guess, in 36. I was 7 years old, to my grandmother's farm, where I met all my beautiful cousins. In the summer, there were 6, 8, or 10 grandchildren in my grandmother's farm. I don't know how she coped with us. And I did that for 3 years. 1938 was the last time I was there. So after we became Hungarians, they became a Slovak government, a fascist government was formed. We Jews could not cross any borders. We could write a postcard once in a while. That's the only communication we had with our family, my maternal family. And the war broke out in 1939. Poland was attacked, you know that. Poland had 3.5 million Jews. They took the brunt of the first ghettos. And we in Hungary, we lived with these racial laws right up to 1944. And I want to talk about Hungarian Jewry. So in 1942, we received a telegram. Somebody sent us from the Hungarian side that my maternal family, this is 1942, it's when Nazi Germany ruled all over continental Europe. They were at the apex of their glory. They called it Festum Europa, Fortress Europe. The telegram said that the Friedman family, my maternal family, were taken away. They simply disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. My mother was devastated. We were all devastated. was thinking of my beautiful cousins. There were two girls that I remember. They were a year or two older than I. Edith and Lily Berger. I used to see them 3 summers, and I kept thinking of them. 3 months later, we received a postcard. It said it had a German eagle on it. It said General Government. Occupied Poland, that part of Poland was called General Government. Lublin District. I knew about Lublin. And the message on the other side was, we, the Friedman family, we are all here together. We are working on farms, and we are awaiting your arrival. A wonderful piece of news out of the darkness. 8 or 10 families received similar postcards, and they were talking about this. Could this be true? We had no other way to find out whether it was true or not. We accepted it. Imagine 1942. Polish Jews were already sitting in ghettos. Treblinka was already operating. Birkenau was operating. And we in Hungary, we knew nothing about it. I just finished reading a book that was written by a Hungarian Jew a few years ago. The title is, How Did It Happen? You see, not knowing is a terrible, terrible thing. And not understanding or listening is a terrible thing. But you know, they kept the lid on the papers. 1943, my Aunt Bella died. She was an invalid. She must have had polio as a child. She was about 42. She was a dear person. She read books all the time. I was sitting on her lap. I think I was a year and a half, 2 years old. I was able to read. I finished Jules Verne's books when I was 5 years old. She taught me how to read, and I got the love of books from my Aunt Bella. She died in 1943. I remember the body was prepared in our home. The casket was made from my grandfather's lumber yard. And she was buried in the cemetery in my town. Out of the 80 extended family that I can think of, she was the only one that was buried in a cemetery. The others were put into gas chambers, crematoria, and their ashes have been blown to the 4 corners of the globe. And in 43, my mother gave birth to a little baby. That was a bad, bad time for a Jewish mother and a Jewish child to be born. You see, mothers truly bore the brunt. Their husbands were gone in labor camps, but everybody sort of picked up the ball. My grandmother, my aunts, my grandfather was always the head of the family. His word was law. So we had that security. This was 1943. 1944, 78 years ago. It was April the 14th or 15th. And this time we had the Seder and Shabbat at the same time. I will never forget that. So when we sit down to the Seder table, this is with us. We think of what happened 78 years ago. It's a bittersweet memory. There was nobody that helped us. Jews were collected in 1944 in Hungary. By some miracle, my father and uncle were home from the labor battalions, And we sat down at this festive table. And I want to tell you what it was like to get ready for Pesach in my house. All the dishes had to be brought down from the attic. There was a huge staircase going up to the attic from the outside. We had a huge attic. You could go for a treasure hunt in the attic. There were all kinds of trunks and things with stuff in it. The house was clean from top to bottom. All the dishes were washed outside at the well. And all these beautiful dishes were made, you know. We lived pretty well from 1944. We had geese that we were feeding. They were 40 to 50 pounders. The smells for Pesach were absolutely ecstatic. And by some miracle, my father and uncle came home from the labor battalion. Just on Friday, around noontime, the Seder was going to be a few hours later. And I remember I can see this Seder table in my grandparents' quarters, the baby in a crib, my younger brothers, Shmilu and Moishi. Well, Shmilu was a genius. Everybody in town knew that he is going to be some genius and he'll be doing something amazing. He had a very high IQ. He never had to do homework. And Moshe was just a kid. The Seder was finished about 12 o'clock. Dishes were put away. We retired. My grandfather and my father and uncle were out in the yard. It was a balmy night. And we had a large Alsatian, whose name was Farkash. Farkash is a name, means a wolf. He was patrolling our property, the lumberyard and the gardens. Nobody has ever encroached our property in the night. He was truly our guardian. My grandfather was saying that if we manage to hold out another 4 to 5 months, we're going to be liberated by the Red Army. We were that close. About 6 o'clock in the morning, Farkash was barking his head off, and there was a bang. We had a big gate entering our property because horse and buggies used to come in. The farmers, when they brought in their goods on Thursday to the market, they parked their horse and buggies in our yard. They sold their goods. And at the end of the day, they came and they bought lumber from my grandfather. So in the middle of the night, I don't know what time it was, somebody's banging on the gate. It was very unusual. So my father looked out the window, and this man is saying, Zoltan. My father's name was Zoltan. They knew each other well. And I could tell from his voice who he was. He was the forester. And my grandfather had to deal with a forester when he was buying sections of forest to cut down into lumber. He says, I need to come in, open the gate. It was a very unusual thing in the middle of the night, letting in a forester with his horse and buggy. He was taken into my grandfather's quarters. The gendarmes are brought here from all the neighboring towns and villages. Tomorrow morning, all the Jews will be collected. I want you to get on this wagon I'm taking you away right now. My grandfather said, no, we're not going. This is Shabbat, and it's Pesach. And my grandfather's word was law. So this bang and 2 gendarmes are in our quarters. Can you imagine? This is truly a rude awakening. I will never forget that moment. It's a shock to the system. Hungarian gendarmes are a crudest bunch. They wear a black felt hat with red rooster tail feathers, yelling and screaming You have 2 minutes to pack a bundle. And we're taking away, if you have any money or jewelry, hand it over, because where you are going, you're going to have no need of this. My mother said, put on layers of clothing. My father said, put your boots on. I had wonderful winter boots made by Mr. Gutman, the shoemaker. You know, boots are very important. My father knew. He was in the labor battalion, so you didn't have good shoes. Your feet were gone. And if you didn't have good shoes when you were taken to the camps, you received a pair of wooden clogs. They were not the arty boots that you see the Dutch people are wearing. It was a piece of 2x4 with a piece of canvas stapled on it. It killed your feet. My father went into the quarters of my grandparents. I think my grandfather was about 77 years old. My grandmother, Malvina, was about 75. My father was 42. My mother was 40. And so the two gendarmes removed us from our home. Can you imagine leaving your house with a bundle? My mother had a baby in her arm, had a bundle of clothing for a baby, and some pots and pans in a sheet on her back, and some food. Everybody carried something. Can you imagine? Can you see 90 families? And we were taken to the school, and we spent the second night there was no second Seder. The second night we spent on the floor in the school was a terrible night. Babies, old people, your comforts of your home were only 15, 20, 25 minutes walking away from the school. We were totally numb from shock. We were guarded by Hungarian gendarmes. The next morning, the 500 Jews were assembled in the schoolyard. The mothers were not allowed to have their carriages just to make their lot worse. The mother had to carry the baby. And we were walked through the middle of the town to jeers and spits. Everybody was happy to see the Jews leave town. The railway station and 50 kilometers to Kasha, where there was a huge brickyard. 30,000 Jews were gathered in this brickyard. 30,000 Jews was guarded by Hungarian gendarmes. There had 2 taps of water coming in there. They had a communal latrine. You could smell it for miles away. And can you imagine mothers would receive the little bit of soup every day? And the food that we brought was gone. She couldn't cook. So all these pots and pans became just an overload. You didn't need it anymore. Imagine you have all these things, and at every stop you leave something behind because you realize that this is something not good. Who needs pots and pans? While in this brickyard, and of course, my mother couldn't breastfeed the baby, and there were other mothers with babies. These babies were wilting away by the day, by the hour. A SS officer arrived, and for about 6 days, he told us the following story. You're going to be resettled in the East. Families will be together. You will be working on farms. Remember I told you about the deception. You know, the lies became the truth in Europe. This was the propaganda machine. The lies became the truth. Look at the world in North America today. The same thing is happening. And I was thinking of my beautiful cousins. You remember that postcard in 42, 2 years before? And this is 44. We are listening to this. I kept thinking that I'm going to meet up with them somewhere near Lublin. Did I know that near Lublin was a death camp called Majdanek? No. In Hungarian Jews, we still didn't know. It was a terrible tragedy of Hungarian Jews. You know, Hungary at that time had the last pool of Jews left in Europe. 700,000 Jews were living in Hungary. During the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, there were 1 million Jews. The Jewish community did not know, couldn't find out what was going on. This book is titled, How Did It Happen? We are talking our hearts out, especially to Jewish communities. You need to know what happened. You need to know how it happens. You can't sweep it under the rug. We are loaded into cattle cars. So you see, you're on a conveyor belt. You're picked out from your home. You make a stop at the school, put on a train, taken to the brickyard. The cattle cars arrive. You can't wait to get to this place of work because the brickyard is killing you. Red dust, the stench of the toilets, 30,000 people. And then you're loaded into a cattle car, 100 people with their bundles. And suddenly military police appears and all the doors in the cattle cars are locked and bolted down. And then you know you are really in a box. And you spend 3 nights and days locked in. Initially, you receive a pail of water and a pail for a toilet. You can write a book of what it's like to be locked in with 100 people. Several old people die. It was a nightmare. You fall asleep, you're stuck together like sardines in a can, in a vertical position that you couldn't sit down. My mother was squeezed somewhere against the wall of this cattle car, holding a baby. Mothers truly bore the brunt, watching their babies die by the second, by the minute. You couldn't wait to get out of this. Finally, the train came to a stop. The door was open, the light flooded in, and a man in a striped jacket and a cap was yelling, "Raus, schnell, out fast." They're out on this platform, SS soldiers all over the place. There was a selection, men and women were separated. You had to leave your bundle in the cattle car. You were in shock. You could see fires coming out from 4 huge chimneys, flames, smell of burning flesh. What is this? I thought we were in a huge industrial zone. There were no goodbyes said on this platform. My mother holding a baby, and my 2 younger brothers, and my grandparents, and my aunt. They were told to go to the left for disinfection. You see, the deception goes on. My father and uncle and I were told to go to the right. We were taken to a barrack. Our clothes were taken away. We had to get undressed. The only thing we were allowed to keep were our boots. Through a shower and into a barrack with triple-tier bunks. You are in total shock. You lay down in this triple-tier bunk on the wooden planks after standing for 3 days and nights in a cattle car. And you fall asleep and you think you're sleeping on the best mattress. Women who were sent to the left, They're going for disinfection. Well, they sent them into the gas chambers. It was called a undressing room for the showers, with hooks all over with numbers. They said, remember the number, tie your shoelaces. So when you come out from the showers, you'll know where your clothes are. 2,000 people were put into a gas chamber, crematoria 2, crematoria 3, 4 and 5. 4, machinery of the devil. And you know, I live with this for as long as I will live, thinking of what happened. With 2,000 people, and my mother trying to save her 3 children, dying from Cyclone B gas. Death here took from 15 to 45 minutes, depending on atmospheric conditions. This was done in the cultured old world of Europe. SS officers were watching through reinforced peepholes the agonies of death. After dying, the gold was knocked out of the teeth of the dead bodies. Body orifices were slit open to look for jewelry. They were looking for jewelry in baked goods. People would bake in jewelry or gold coins into a Kaiser bun or jar of jam. There was a document called The Final Solution in 1942. The process of how they're going to process the Jews, the 12 million Jews, to the letter it was laid out. Clothing will be cleaned, sent to the fatherland. Women's hair was baled by the ton, sent to the fatherland. The gold would be melted down into bricks. And Oscar Gröning, the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, was taking it to Berlin, to the Reichsbank, 2 or 3 times a week. Can you imagine this business of corruption? Body parts from here were shipped to teaching universities in Germany and Austria. Medical experiments were done here on children, teenagers, women, and men. You know, what I saw there, the brain cannot comprehend. You cannot write it down. You need to have been there. It's hard to believe that this could have happened. We were taken down to Auschwitz I, my father, uncle, and I. We received striped clothing and a tattooed number, and I became a slave laborer. We were together for 2 months in Auschwitz. Labor here was 10 to 12 hours of hard labor. You had to walk to the job sites, draining swamps, digging trenches, hard work. You could be beaten to a pulp. Our couples, the work bosses, were psychopaths from German jails. These were in charge of us. In July, my father and uncle were selected out because the Reich was falling apart. They knew. We could already see here American bombers were flying overhead, and we knew that the Americans are bombing Auschwitz III. There was a huge factory being built by IG Farben. They were making synthetic rubber. And we kept, boy, oh boy, this was beautiful. Hundreds of these huge planes. We kept thinking, keep throwing those bombs. I knew that then the finale is going to be a battle. My father and uncle were selected out. I had seconds to say goodbye to them. My father blessed me. They were in a quarantine area in Auschwitz I. And he told me if I managed to survive, I had to tell the world what happened. Never saw them again. I have the documents of their selection. The documents are sitting in the Auschwitz Museum archives in the Yad Vashem. You know, the killers were their own archivists and bookkeepers. You know, Germany is a country that everything is punktlich, you know, everything has to be recorded. It says, Ordnung muss sein, order must be. Anyone that had a tattooed number, they kept a record, they had punch cards. They kept record of all the people. I was in Auschwitz till January the 12th, 1945. And when we were taken away on a death march, we could hear the artillery from the Eastern Front. It was a terrible night. Fires all over. They were burning the cards of prisoners, the inmates that had a tattooed number. They were burning it in fires all over. They didn't want to leave any record behind. And you start to walk with about 30,000 slave laborers. Many had wooden clogs in a paper jacket, you know, striped piece of garbage in January in bitter cold on the byways and the highways. 5 people, their arms hooked together. SS guards on both sides with attack dogs. Non-stop. People who fell out of the column, they were dispatched with a bullet. And then 4 days later, they were loaded into open flat cars. And off we went, exposed to the elements. Dresden, Pilsen, in occupied Czechoslovakia, arrived in Mauthausen. That death march took 13 days. Arrived in Mauthausen, January the 25th. Spent 4 days in this terrible place without food. If you read my book, you need to read this book. You cannot believe the treatment we had. We were taken to another camp. Every time we were moved, it was a terrible big job because our bodies were now so weak. I was taken to a camp called Melk on the Danube. From Melk, we were taken at the beginning of April to a camp called Ebensee in the Alpine Mountains, not far from Salzburg. Camp was called Ebensee. And about 3 weeks before liberation, I mean, I knew that the end was coming, but I knew that the end is going to be the finish for us. They locked the camp and threw away the keys. They shut the water system off. You know, our daily diet was 300 calories a day. We couldn't drink the water. There was lots of swamp here. We're draining swamps, but you couldn't drink the water because you drank the swamp water. You died from dysentery. The water had to be boiled. So the tea that we received in the morning before leaving the camp for work was a cup of tea, herbal tea. And on this, you worked for 10 to 12 hours. Lunch was a slop soup. You received a ladle that was mostly water and whatever that was in it. Terrible things were floating in it. And on this, you worked till about 7 or 8. You came back to camp and you received your dinner, which was a cup of ersatz coffee, a thin slice of bread about a 1/4 inch thin, and a tiny square of margarine. Imagine living on this day after day after day. Sunday, we didn't work. We received 2, 3 little tiny potatoes. That was truly a treat. You know, a peel of potatoes, people would kill for. People would kill for a crumb of bread. I've seen the best and the worst of it. That's what hunger does. So there's no water. Typhus broke out. We were infested with lice. Dead bodies were thrown out in the square. I'm in a lower bunk. This is May. I didn't know what day it was. I lost count. I was in the lower bunk, 5 people per bunk. 2 on each side of me were already dead bodies. Somebody shuffled into the barrack in his wooden clogs. And he said that the guards are no longer in the top. Imagine a camp with barracks, electrified wire all around. Every 100 feet or so, there's a guard tower with an SS bucket helmet, a machine gun, and a searchlight. I didn't know whether I was having a fever dream, but something told me I need to get out. If I don't get out now, I will never make it out. I crawled out over cadavers, and I saw that the tower was empty. Do you know the feeling I had when I didn't see that SS bucket there? I knew that they are gone. They didn't kill me. You know, I was liberated, but I wasn't free. Seconds later, the gate came flying in. There was a big thing coming through with a white star on it. There were black soldiers sitting on the turret. And I remember their eyes. I will never forget their eyes. They were in total shock. This was the first camp that this unit liberated. This unit was called the 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion. It was a segregated unit attached to General Patton's Third Army. And I met Johnny Stevens, who was in charge of 12 tanks. Years later, he lived in New Jersey. Came to Toronto, I went to New Jersey. I will never forget their eyes. They were in total shock. The stench. Thousands of bodies. It was very warm. What did the Americans do with it? They, first of all, they saw people's skeletons, those that were still able to crawl around, and others who couldn't crawl around, but they were still moving. What do we do with all these thousands of people? We give them food. So they brought in an army kitchen. I remember watching the army bringing in a unit that was a kitchen unit, and they put up a tent. They brought up huge tanker trucks with hot water, set up showers. They had to cut the rags off from us and DDT'd us. We were full of rice. You could smell the stew cooking, and it made me actually sick. You know, once you haven't eaten for a while, and once your life is sort of fading away, you don't want to eat. And the smell made me sick. People that managed to get to the kitchen crawl, they got a ladle of stew, they ate it. 2 minutes later, they dropped dead. Their stomachs ruptured. The irony was that they're dying from starvation. Now, when food was given us, it killed us. And we had to deal with this extra trouble. So I was there for 2 months. I couldn't walk. And the camp was being liquidated. And they said, anybody wants to go to Czechoslovakia, a truck is leaving tomorrow. And I was on this truck, made my way back home. I knew that nobody would be there. I was hoping that Farkas would be there. I had rides from farmers. I walked the last few kilometers. I could see my home from a distance. The war went right through my town. One side of the wall was full of holes from machine gun bullets or whatever. That home was a busy place a year before. 3 families, chickens, geese, and ducks roaming all over the place. I knew that when I'm a half kilometer away, Farkash would know, because he usually was out there greeting me when I came home from school every day. And I'm closer and closer, and it's a dead place. Nothing is moving. I opened the door to my mother's kitchen. A neighbor was sitting there. Can you imagine what I looked like? I wore a Hitler Youth shirt because this is what the Americans gave us. They had no other clothing. My body was full of water. I couldn't breathe. I had pleurisy. I didn't know that. I went to see this neighbor who, Christian lady, Ili Klinka was her name. She was a good friend of ours. And she screamed up when she saw me. She gave me a bath, burnt all this shirt and the pants that I had. This is what she told me. I said, what happened here? When we were collected and we were spent at night in the school. She said, you know, your home was ransacked to the bare walls. Every Jewish home was ransacked to the bare walls. They took away the animals, the livestock. Nothing was left. The shul, the synagogue, the prayer books and the Talmudic books were burned. The Torah scrolls were taken out of the ark, cut into ribbons and worse. This is what happened in my town. So this was the story of Hungarian Jews. Excuse me, I just want to stop this. Hello? Call me back in half an hour. I'm reading this book, How It Happened. And I'm saying that the Jewish community fell down on their job in Budapest. They had all the offices in Budapest. There was a large Jewish community. They should have known, they should have warned us. Today, when we are telling you, you better keep your ears open. I can see, I said that it starts with words. What is happening here in schools and universities, it's like poison mushroom growing every day. These will be the future leaders. It's all about the BDS movements, swastikas. I talk to students. I said, what does the swastika mean to you? Said, oh, well, it's on a flag. It's a symbol of poison, of blood, murder, gas. They walked under the swastika. When I see a swastika, I go livid. I said, did you know that 55,000 Canadian soldiers died fighting against the swastika? They would be turning over in their graves would they see that swastikas are being spray painted on synagogues and cemeteries. In this country, did you know that only 40% of students know that the Holocaust in Canada? Others say it didn't really happen. Don't hope that somebody else will do the heavy lifting and everybody else will be saved. The Auschwitz protocols, 2 young men escaped from Auschwitz in 43. One was a Dr. Verba. He wound up in Vancouver. He was a dentist. And the Auschwitz protocols were translated into Italian, English. It was sent to Rome, to Roosevelt, and everywhere in 43. And we weren't told. We didn't know. And it was given to Horthy, who was the regent of Hungary, and the bishops of Hungary, high officials. And they realized that, boy, this is really bad. But they didn't do anything about it either. They simply were waiting for the spoils. Imagine that from continental Europe, thousands of locomotives were pulling their miserable human cargo east to occupy Poland. Brasov. And Brasov, I have a special, the international, all these laws against Jews coming from Brasov. Brasov, Paris, Rome, Berlin, Bratislava, Budapest, Bucharest, all the way south in Saloniki. Millions of Jews are being funneled to the death camps in occupied Poland. Not a single rail track was sabotaged. People simply stood by in continental Europe. They said, well, this is not our business. This should be our business. So we live so far, we're living in a democratic country, but that can change fast. I speak in schools and they listen to the Canadian anthem in the morning. And it says, Canada, glorious and free. We stand on guard for thee. Freedom is not free. And we are watching a war in the Ukraine. So we're living in perilous times. Everybody needs to focus on this. So I'll leave it at this. And if you have any questions, I think a couple of questions would be fine.
Max, thank you for sharing your story with us so powerfully and your message. I think many of us sort of, have heard the stories before, and yet for someone like you to share it with us directly, it just becomes so much more impactful and meaningful. Please, if anybody has any questions for Max that you'd like to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and share your question or comments, or if you prefer, you can just type them into the chat box.
I have something I'd like to share. It's Sandra. This goes back several years ago. An elderly friend of mine is from Hungary, and she was a concentration camp survivor from Theresienstadt. And when the Germans did the reparations and you had to go into Toronto to the German consulate, well, her husband couldn't take her, and I took her. And she said to me, and I quote, Sandra, I said to my husband, I don't want this, it's blood money, end quote. I'll never forget it.
Thank you, Sandra.
Can I just say something? There's a so-called office called the Claims Conference. They think about the properties the Jews left behind. Germany was the only country that dealt with this. When East Germany and West Germany joined up again after the Berlin Wall came down. Every piece of property was handed over to the Claims Conference by the government. There are countries that don't want to touch this subject at all. So there are many Holocaust survivors that are needy. And everybody has their own feelings about it. So I can understand how certain people feel. But I just want you to know one thing. In the Second World War, Jews fought tooth and nail against the Nazis. You know that 1.5 million Jews fought. There were 800,000 Jews that fought in the Russian armies, 800,000. 500,000 Jews fought in the American army. Did you know that 20,000 Canadian Jewish teenagers volunteered before there was conscription in Canada? Did you know that the Palestinian Jewish Brigade had 30,000 Jews that fought with the British, with a Star of David on their epaulets? The British said, well, we can use it, but you cannot have the Star of David. He says, well, if we can't have the Star of David, then we're not going. And I said, okay. They fought as partisans. You remember the Bielski brothers? Did you see this movie, Defiance? 1,200 Jews, old babies. 1.5 million Jews fought tooth and nail per capita. It was a larger number than the rest of the world. So sometimes I hear people say the Jews went into the gas chambers like sheep. That's a terrible thing to say. You cannot make a judgment when you're living here in a nice, free world or what happened. So I just want to leave this thought since, okay.
Thank you, Max. Any other questions or comments this morning for Max? Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Again, Max, thank you so much for being with us and sharing that with us. I just want to remind everybody that Wednesday evening is the Hamilton Jewish Community's Yom HaShoah commemoration at the Westdale Theater. So we hope you will join with us there. And I'll also mention that our Breakfast Club series will resume again on May 15th, and we will be continuing with the Next Generation series with the young people's presentations. It's, there's no words. There's no words. And Max, you've said everything so eloquently. So again, we just want to, it's important that we remember. And thank you for helping us do that today, Max.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.